Today I'm comparing the absolute cheapest paints to the most expensive one I could find. Holy shit! I'll be also testing many paints that most miniature painters never use, including these expensive, toxic cadmium paints. There is one specific reason why I am testing these, but I'll get to that later. And by the end, it should be clear whether paying extra for your paints is worth it or not. So let's start with the cheapest option. For that, I went to Flying Tiger Copenhagen. This is like a dollar store, so you are guaranteed to get some cheap paints. Unfortunately, the only ones I found were part of these do-it-yourself packs. At 80 crowns for this pack, we are looking at around 77 cents per pot. But mind you, there is this little decoration, so by themselves they would be probably cheaper than that. Whenever I tested cheap paints in the past, it backfired horribly. So let's see if they can be used on a mini. Oh my god. Even getting inside the paints proves to be a Herculean task. You know what, I kinda realized that I don't wanna use my brush for this, because maybe it will get damaged or something. A spatula! Ta-da! That's right, I'll use a spatula, so I can feel like a real artist. But before actually fucking up my miniature, perhaps it's a good idea to see what's happening on my palette and then test it on a piece of paper. As I'm spreading the paints on my palette, it's clear they are not like regular hobby paints. They have this kinda slimy, buttery feel to them, which means they don't have as much pigment. Okay, you know what? Enough of spreading these paints. Let's put them to the test and apply some on this piece of paper. You know what? This is not too bad. Maybe I was wrong, maybe this is just fine. But it was not fine. As you'll see very soon, these paints are utter rubbish. I tested them a bit more, but it was pretty clear they all share this slimy property. Okay, you know what? Enough of this. Let's actually paint the miniature. Given the terrible pigmentation, I almost emptied the entire paint pot. Hopefully, that'll be enough. Well, this is quite surprising. It's not as bad as I thought. Like, obviously it doesn't cover super well, nowhere near as regular hobby paints, at this thickness at the very least. But like, I think that this might actually work. So I decided to base coat the entire squig. Despite the first impression not being too bad, it was pretty difficult to get a uniform layer. Because once you spread the paint and it starts drying, the coverage is uneven. Also, since the paints are low on pigment, they have plenty of binder and medium, which brings us to another problem. So far, it's not looking too bad, but they do take too long to dry, so hairdryer time it is. Right after that, it's time for another layer. This time, I really hope to get rid of any patchiness and inconsistencies. Unfortunately, you gotta use very thick layers to get the right coverage. Clearly, these paints are made for paper, not miniatures. One cheap trick to get better coverage is to mix in some well-covering pigments like white. So I do that as well, but still, this doesn't leave me very impressed. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna end it here. I had enough of these paints. These cost twice as much as the previous paints, so they might be a solid upgrade. They even marked opacity on the tubes, so now I can focus on the ones which are supposed to be opaque. Keyword: supposed to be. And our testing subject is none other than this Black Templar. Bring it back. Spreading the paints on my palette, it seems like some of them will be better, and some of them will be the same. After testing multiple colors on paper, they are better in saturation. Not only is there more pigment, but they also seem to feature pigment of higher quality. But is it even comparable to hobby paints? Now, because these are supposed to be better than the previous paints, I gave them a harder challenge. which is a black undercoat. Using this kinda grey-purple seems to work reasonably well, so it's time for something more difficult, which is red. And right away, all my hopes and dreams crumble after seeing this joke of a coverage. This is quite terrible, and probably the same like the last time, except now we don't have a white undercoat. So to even the playing field, let's start from a bright undercoat as well. And yeah, while I can say that this is much better, it's a real pain in the ass to work with. It can be done, but why would you go through so many hoops to get a simple base coat? One thing I wanted to try is paint some gold non-metallic metal. This required many, and I really can't fucking understate this, many layers to get it right. I really can't see this being efficient for anyone. In the end, I would say you can get something that doesn't look too bad, but the way to get there is long and treacherous. If you have more time than money, I guess you can use them, but I would rather save up for actual hobby paints. So let's give these 4 out of 10, and we should adjust the previous colors to 2 out of 10. Now, we should talk about standard hobby paints, and you guys already know that they are good. Literally watch any other video on this channel, and you'll see them in action. I'm using AK Interactive, but Army Painter Fanatic, the new ones, are fine. Citadel, Vallejo, all of those are usable. For 99% of everything, I use only that, so most likely you won't need much else. By the way, do you see this Archon miniature right here? Well, this model is gonna have a full tutorial series on my Patreon. Part 1 is already out and more is coming soon. So if you would like to know how I painted anything on this mini, there will be a link in the description. Now, I should talk about the actual reason why we thought of this video idea. You see, as I was painting this beautiful miniature that features many yellows, well, I kinda found out that hobby paints don't feature well covering yellow paints. And so I just wanted to see what's out there in the world and see if I can replace my current yellows with something that's better. So far what we've used has kinda mixed results, so let's see if actual artist-grade paints will do better. Before testing the toxic cadmium paints, it's time for their cadmium-free versions. At $27 per bottle, they cost about as much as 7 hobby paints. As I put them on my palette, they look very appealing. The saturation is very nice, and the thickness means you gotta thin them more. That's good actually, because you get more paint out of less volume, so while very expensive, they last very long. On paper, these clearly represent the best reds and yellows so far. Despite thinning them quite a bit, the opacity is unmatched. Of course, over black, yellow struggles, so you can either use a thicker paint consistency and spread it well, or, you know, just don't paint yellow over black, like a civilized person. On the miniature, I already started with yellow-brown undercoat. This is what I would use anyway before building up a very bright yellow. And as I apply this first coat of cadmium-free yellow, I gotta say, it's probably the best pure yellow I used so far. It's not the magic in a bottle I thought it might be, but it could become my go-to yellow. Of course, if you don't need super saturated yellow and you're fine working with ochres and yellow browns, you probably don't need this. But if you're after a really saturated primer yellow, this one will make a better job than any hobby paint. Testing cadmium-free red medium and cadmium-free red light, I probably like the lighter version more. I can imagine that in just 2 applications you get full coverage and saturation like nowhere else. In fact, it covers even better than yellow, but I kinda expected that. Overall, I would give them 7.5 out of 10. Okay, it's time to get toxic. The poisonous counterparts are actually a bit cheaper. At $25 a pop, you get the same volume. Cadmium paints are dangerous. If you lick your brush when using them, you'll fucking die. Well, not right away, but cadmium is a heavy metal, and as such it's harmful to humans. Just like the music. Try to not touch it, do not consume it, and most of all, don't spray it. Maybe using the mask for a brush-on application was an overkill, but whatever. I really don't see that much of a difference on paper, so let's compare on the miniature. The yellow seems fairly similar. I gotta admit that the coverage seems better, but not that much better. It'll still require multiple coats, and so I'll probably stick to the cadmium-free version. On the other hand, real cadmium red is visibly better. Just trying it on this section of the base, when you compare the left side to the right side, I know which one I would go for. I probably haven't seen such a saturated red paint that would have this kind of coverage. And as such, it could totally find its way into some of my projects. To be fair, cadmium-free variant is not that far behind, so if you wanna make an upgrade, the cadmium-free versions are that for sure. But if you can work around the toxicity, I think that the real cadmium red is slightly better in terms of coverage. But again, maybe just applying multiple coats is fine. For me, these would be 8.5 out of 10. Here it is. This is $100 paint, so let's see what it looks like. Ta-da! Unfortunately, we haven't found any acrylic lapis lazuli paint, so we settled on oil paint. And these days, it is not that unusual to work with oils on miniatures. For comparison, I am using some cheap oil paints that I've bought some time ago. The tricky part about oils is that you need to use white spirit or other types of paint thinners. Water simply doesn't work. Oils also take a long time to fully dry, so using glass palette is a good option. And immediately, I don't understand why this paint is so expensive. I mean, it is just a paint, but it's not particularly chromatic or interesting in any way. The cheap blue oil paint, on the other hand, is much more juicy. Even on the miniature, the cheap blue covers quite well, whereas lapis lazuli really doesn't. This is quite disappointing, but ultimately not that surprising. If you research lapis lazuli, you'll find that it's so expensive because of its tedious mining and refinement. However, modern synthetic pigments are usually much better. So what does it all tell us? Cheap paints? They fight you every step of the way. Craft paints? Technically usable, if you like to suffer. Expensive artist paints? Some are incredible, but probably only as a supplement. And hobby paints? They are not magic, but they are made for exactly what we do. And that's the point. It's not about the price, it's about how well the paint lets you do what you want. But paints are just one piece of the puzzle. The other one is how you use them. And of course, that's what my channel is all about. So if you wanna level up your painting, watch this video next, where I talk about how you get smooth results on your minis. And see you there!